webinar, Managing Difficult Employees, 15 Types of Employees Who Challenge Us, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We are very happy that you can join us today. My name is Michelle Wilcox, and I will be your moderator, and I will also be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All the webinar materials we discuss can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. We do not control the audio, your devices do, so if you have audio difficulties, try adjusting the volume settings on your device. If a telephone line goes down or dead during the call, hang up and call back again at the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the questions box during the webinar. If you're using a tablet, you may have to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will try to work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your question or comment during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout. The presenter will be answering questions at the end. And lastly, we have a number of upcoming webinars covering a variety of topics, including those listed on the Heffernan webinar website. With that, our presenter today is Dr. Steve Albrecht. Dr. Albrecht is a trainer, author, and consultant specializing in complex HR issues and security concerns. He holds a doctorate in business administration, an MA in security management, a BS in psychology, and a BA in English. He is board certified in HR, security management, employee coaching, and threat management. He has written 24 books on business, service, leadership, security, and criminal justice subjects. Thank you today for being with us, Dr. Albrecht, and I'll go ahead and turn this over to you now.
Thanks, Michelle, and good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Pleased to be with you again, and also always enjoy our conversations with the good folks from Heffernan and Aspen Risk Management. And Michelle, let me see, those are up. How's that look, Michelle?
Give it a second. Yep, you're good to go.
Great, thanks a lot. So thanks to Heffernan and thanks to the good folks at Aspen Risk Management. I think this is year 4 or 5 of me doing these programs, and I appreciate the time here. So when we think about the concept of the people who challenge us as supervisors, as frontline managers and supervisors, as longtime managers and supervisors, as leaders in organizations, what I have prepared for you is a collection of what we would call archetypes. Archetypes is a collection of behaviors that point us in a certain direction about kind of themes that the person exhibits. So people ask all the time, is this some sort of profiling? And it's not. It is a collection of behaviors that most supervisors, whether you've been one for a short time or a long time, have seen in certain people. I have taken them into this collection of 15 because they're the ones that are most common that I see in my coaching work. I just finished writing a book on employee coaching. I just turned the manuscript in on Tuesday, and I have this subject on the brain because I thought a lot about these 15 types in the book and wrote about them and looked at these archetypes kind of in connection to what our best approaches are, but really some of the background reasons why they exist. And so I kind of delved into that into the book. There's some kind of backstory issues about how people exhibit certain behaviors that work for them, even if they're negative, like bullying, for example, or harassing behavior, because somehow it seems to have worked for them in maybe this job or previous jobs. And there are things that I want to address with them through your conversation with them, coaching conversations that attempt to stop these behaviors that are negative and support the behaviors that are positive and get the best out of everybody. So I define coaching as a pre-disciplined conversation about performance or behavior. Work performance, we define as quality of work and deadlines and meeting goals and doing the kind of work that we expect people to do based on their job description. And work behavior is those things that sometimes drive people crazy. Sarcasm, rudeness, rude to clients, customers, taxpayers, visitors, vendors, idea killing in meeting, people in meetings that shoot down other folks' new ideas at the fledgling stage. So I think sometimes when we do these types of conversations, it can be easy to confuse the PIP, Performance Improvement Plan, with the BIP, which is Behavior Improvement Plan. what I want you to think about is there is a need for each, perhaps, in our coaching conversations, especially at the nth stage where it does not seem to be working. We define coaching as those types of informal or formal conversations about performance or behavior that you have as a supervisor walking down the hallway, what I would call corridor coaching, or seeing people in a more informal environment, not just you sitting behind your big desk while they sit in front of your desk in the little chair. But you can do it walking and talking, and you can do it out in the field. You can do it in the break room. You can do it in some confidential conversation you have in one of the training rooms, or an area where it's kind of more neutral territory. The function of those meetings is to get the changes that you both agree are important for the organization based on their job duties and descriptions, and based on those types of behaviors that we'd like to eliminate or at least lessen so they don't impact the business in a negative way. And I always look at the concept of negative impact or business impact as the reason for coaching. Why do we have these conversations? Because this person's performance or behavior hurts the business. We can see in everybody, including me, eccentricities and odd things that people do at work just based on their personality. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about things that make it hard for people to do business with each other, for our customers and clients and taxpayers, people we provide services to, that it's stressful for them, and that things that hurt the business because they interrupt the conversation, they interrupt the flow of goods and services, all those things that make coaching necessary. And I also say in coaching, typically my usual approach, having done this for 30 years, is one issue per meeting, and typically one meeting per week or so. I do a lot of coaching with clients, and most of my work is in public government. I've been doing public government work in California since '99. Is, can you meet with this person as often and as soon as possible to get their heads back on straight? And I always say the same thing, more of me is not better, surprisingly enough. That the idea is, let things percolate, let stuff settle for them, let them think about the issues, changes, concepts, tools that we talked about during the coaching discussion. I'll be talking about coaching in more detail the next Heffernan Aspen Risk Management program I do, which is on October 7th. But let's foreshadow this by talking about what coaching is and how it can work in this conversation here with these 15 types. So we look at what is the impact on the business. Does this person's behavior or performance impact the business in a negative way? If so, then we address it. If not, it's eccentric or it's just a little not what we would do or a little odd, we move on. Do we rationalize, however, irrational behaviors or unacceptable behaviors in the workplace by saying, I'm not a social worker or a psychologist, or, you know, I'm not in HR. This is supposed to be HR's job. And the answer is, we as supervisors and managers, department heads, have to address these things before it becomes an HR issue. Third thing, we're not profiling people, we're looking at behaviors that impact the business in a negative way. Fourth thing, is our goal peace or justice at work? And the answer is peace, right? Justice is sort of a final kind of an HR, you know, issue related to discipline or termination. We have some steps along the way before we get to that. And one of the last steps, and this is important, and we'll talk about it because it is important, is the final coaching meeting before we switch over to discipline. And I call that meeting the PAM, P-A-M, Personal Accountability Meeting. That's in your slides coming up. The personal accountability meeting says, this is the last coaching conversation we will have, employee. We've been talking about this issue of behavior or performance for some span of time. You have not made the changes we have asked for. You've not made the changes I've asked for. As a result, the next discussion will not be coaching, will be discipline. Written warning, verbal warning, suspension, demotion, transfer, whatever happens to be that you use in your progressive discipline process. That's important because those of you that work in a union environment, the next meeting with the employee is what's called a Weingarten meeting, in which case they have the opportunity to have a rep, an employee rep, with them during that meeting. It is no longer a coaching meeting. Look at that fifth point. Alignment. Sometimes you are the best fit for talking with an employee. You and he or she go back a ways. You have some experience together. There is a better fit in terms of just personality and rapport. Maybe, though, you may be asked to coach people that are not on your chain of command. I see this all the time. Sometimes we bring in somebody who just has a better fit, could be based on age or race or gender or just previous experience, which tends to be more positive, then we let them do it. I oftentimes have, in my workplace violence career and my high risk, high stress HR coaching career, have situations where the person who is having the conversation with the employee is the one the employee hates their purple guts. And I say, let's not have this person in the room. If it's manager or supervisor, let's have somebody else come in and talk with this person who is already furious at the organization. So sometimes alignment says, who is the best person to have these coaching conversations? Maybe it's you, because your experience, your personality, your way with doing this tends to be maybe a little better than coworkers or colleagues and your peers. Then sometimes we will ask you to do these things. Second to the last one there, no consequences for the employee's performance or behavior issues, no change. And I look at this all the time, not in terms of hammering people with discipline, but we have to do something forward of the personal accountability meeting that says there are consequences without change. Otherwise, and think about this, the employee just sort of considers what we're doing as a chat. We're just having a friendly chat about work. In actuality, we're having a coaching conversation about work performance and work behavior. Do you need acting skills in these conversations? Sometimes you do. It's hard to be patient with people who are impatient. It's hard to be patient with people who don't have good listening skills, as sometimes employees under stress do not have. And then the last one is proof of change. How do we prove what I would call the ROCI, or the return on the coaching investment, the time and energy you spent doing the coaching work? And there we're looking for changes in what I would call the big seven, and I'll show those in just a second. And the other part is that sometimes the changes are gradual, and sometimes they're not obviously noticeable. If we ask an employee to show up at work every day at 8:15 to start working, and they show up at 8:15 ready to work, and we see this day after day after day, it's more measurable. But look at things that are not so measurable: attitude, teamwork, service skills. Those things may not be as measurable, but they're observable, and we look at that over a span of time. One last thing to say about coaching: I give people in coaching conversations, which I do almost every week in my work, homework. And homework, and I put that phrase in quotes, means that it's work they do at work. We don't send them home to write a book report about, Moby Dick or some classic. We send them back to their work area, workstation, cubicle with something to read or do or fill out. It could be a copy of a policy that we want them to discuss at the next meeting. It could be a cheat sheet, a template, a manual, something that helps them work the software, the equipment, or devices. It could be some self-assessment inventory that we get online. It could be videos or things that they read online as a result of some useful YouTube videos, things like that. And the reason for homework is, again, it's not just a chat. It has a direction, and we are attempting, by giving them the homework, quote unquote, done at work, to re-emphasize the things that we've talked about in the coaching meeting. Okay, big seven: work performance, quality of work, deadlines, meeting deadlines. Work is useful and error-free to the organization, and also it comes in a way that supports what other people are trying to do, meaning I don't hold up my colleagues because I'm not doing my work. Work performance. Violation of policy and procedure, pretty straightforward. You cannot smoke in the dynamite factory, right? So this is harassment. It's things around sort of ethical issues in the organization, things that we ask people to do to take care of each other and get along civilly while they work together. Third one, conflict. This is conflict usually in the work that I do, one-on-one issues between two employees that are not talking to each other. And this can happen where it's something small and stupid, and it is allowed to grow and fester and become the reason they don't speak to each other for 5 years. And I've seen that many times. Fourth one, attendance, pretty measurable, right? They're either there or not. We talk about managing their breaks or lunches, vacations, sick time accurately and ethically. Attitude, again, hard to measure, but sometimes we see it quite obviously in interactions with coworkers, vendors, visitors, taxpayers, clients, customers, bosses. Service to the organization, and really think in service, 2 ways to measure that. We talk about internal service, which is how we take care of each other, right? Internal departments serve the organization, like IT, for example, facilities, public works, things like that. And then external service to the customer, client, taxpayer who we're dealing with. Last one, kind of related to all of them, which is teamwork, where they're refusing or failing to work successfully in teams. Deadlines, not sharing the work, not doing things to the quality the team needs, and then also being disruptive to the team itself. So these are what I would call the big seven. And if you look at them kind of in the totality, some of them are measurable, attendance for sure. Some of them are abstract and need more thought in terms of how we measure success or failure, as if the employee is doing or not doing things in that particular area. I talk a lot about books in my work. I've written 28. I'm a book guy. I do a lot of work with libraries. I have a specialty consulting practice for libraries. I've been doing that for 25 years, and there are a lot of issues around safety and security, which I help libraries with. I talk about books with library people. because they get them and read them, and I'm always appreciative of that. This is a book I suggest for your bookshelf. You can look at the YouTube videos that are related to it if you don't want to read the book. This book has been out, I think since 2002. Crucial Conversations is around the third edition so far, third or fourth edition. And these guys really captured what I think is the spirit of coaching conversations. Three elements exist in coaching for what they would call a crucial conversation. High stakes for one or both parties. Strong emotions for one or both parties. Opinions vary as to what to do. If you agree and the stakes are low and it's not an emotional issue, that's about 80 to 90% of the conversations we have all day long, personally and professionally. If you don't agree and the stakes are high for one or both parties, like they could get fired, and emotions run strong, tears, anger, frustration, and opinions vary as to what to do, different opinions, we disagree. Those are what they would call the 10%, 10 to 20% as crucial conversations. So the value to that definition, the value to these three elements to the definition is that it helps you recognize when the stakes are high, when it's an emotional issue. And perhaps you did not see that at the beginning of the coaching discussion with the employee, but it turns into this based on these three elements coming to pass. And I like it because it gives us permission to coach. High stakes, strong emotions, different opinions, it's what to do. When I wrote the coaching book that I just finished, I did a whole big section on the emotions that we deal with in coaching. And some of them are tears, male and female. Some of them is anger. Some of it is frustration. Some of it is anxiety. Some of it is being so stoic that they just sit there and they don't respond to anything that you say. So there are lots of things that you can look at as we go through this list of 15 that you may have to ramp up your process, ramp up your approach to provide more energy to the situation, or at least pay better attention to their emotional response to it. Because as human beings, we look at these things and say, what does this matter to me? Do I make these changes or not? What is my boss looking for me to do? And sometimes that's an internal dialogue, and sometimes it's an external dialogue. So I like the book. There are lots of YouTube videos that these guys have done as part of their Crucial Conversations sort of cadre of training processes, and you can look at those as well if you don't want to get the book, but I suggest the book as useful for your bookshelf. So we talked about this a little bit. Coaching is defined as a pre or post-discipline conversation about performance or behavior. Why would it be a post-discipline conversation, Steve? What are you talking about? Well, I've had lots of situations where people have come back from suspension, come back from sexual harassment, racial harassment, people have come back from certain behavioral issues where they've been demoted, certain behavioral issues where they've had work taken away from them, their job duties and descriptions changed as a result of their behavioral problems, but we still want them in the organization based on whatever skill sets or technical knowledge or successes that they can help us with. Second part, a series of conversations that help the employee along his or her career path. So I would also define coaching as developmental, meaning there are not every employee wants to promote, but for those employees that do, we help them develop along a career path, promote to the next level, even if it's moving from employee to supervisor, or supervisor to manager, or manager to department head, or department head to executive leadership. So that is part of what we would call mentorship as well. Mentorship coaching is how we help these people move along. Not every employee does, but how do we select those employees who have the best skills that we want for not only today, but, and this is very important, but succession planning. Who is going to take over and run this organization when people leave or retire? And I always have this conversation with senior executives, which is, well, the number 2 person is going to take over for the number 1 when the number 1 leaves. And not necessarily. And number 2 may not want that job, and number 2 may not be qualified for that job. Whereas somebody from the outside, another department or another team member may be more qualified. Last one, a way to identify skill gaps. There are things that employees sometimes cover up that they don't know how to do. I've seen situations where an employee has worked there 2 years, doesn't know how to work software, asks other employees to do it for him or her. We identify those skill gaps and we fill those with coaching. Solve conflicts between 2 employees, reward success, and make the performance evaluation process easier. If you look at these 15 types and the conversations I'm going to suggest that you have with them, one of the most important things is to keep coaching notes, keep a coaching file on every employee. It is not NOT, not a secondary personnel file, but it makes the performance appraisal, performance evaluation process easier because you look at the things that you talked about during the rating period, 6 months, 1 year, whatever happens to be. I'm a big fan of shorter performance evaluation discussions, meaning that we do it at least twice a year. In my perfect world, we would do it quarterly, which is always a sort of a controversial take, meaning every quarter we have conversations, and then the final coaching conversation, final performance evaluation conversation at the end of the year is accumulation of the previous 3. But for most people, they do it once a year, and having coaching files on each employee that talks about all the things you have discussed during the time span, the rating period time span, makes the performance evaluation process easier. So if you look at, and I talked about this in my book pretty deeply, if you look at the ways that we coach, it's executive or strategic. That's the direction of the organization with the top team. That's strategy retreats and things around the strategic plan and things around the direction of the organization and overall. Second one is the career development, mentorship, directional support that we give to employees who want to improve and move to the next level, be it promotion. Third one, performance improvement, which is how do we get them better at their jobs, meaning that they have gaps in their knowledge that we fill with training and support and shadowing them with other people and sending them to classes and bringing them knowledge for them to get exposed to. The second to the last one is probably the one where I do most of my work and maybe some of your work as well, which is corrective. Stop doing certain things. They hurt the business. They're not good for your career. If you want to continue to work here, you're going to stop doing these things. And the last one is kind of interesting, special problems. This is people that have significant off-the-job issues, domestic violence in the workplace, mental health issues, physical health issues, family problems, and they're stuck. It affects their work. It affects their feelings about coming to work and doing their work when they'd rather be someplace else. And so we make referral, employee assistance programs, outside support systems, behavioral health referrals, things like that, to employees that are in need of that type of issue. So it's not life coach stuff, but it is helping them with significant off-the-job issues which affect their work. Okay. A couple, three tools here for you. One is I use this all the time. It's an organizational development or OD tool, old school OD tool called Keep, Stop, Start. Employee, we'd like you to keep doing this because it's working for us. Keep on keeping on. Employee, stop doing this because it's not working. It's a waste of time and money. It's not good use of your time. It's not value-added activity. Stop doing it immediately. Start doing this because it'll work better. So you can insert these 3 into the conversation and ask the employee to come up with possibilities here, or you can do them yourself and the employee says, well, I don't know what to fix. Usually, and not surprisingly, between the 3, stop is the one that oftentimes spends a lot of time in the corrective coaching area. Stop doing this. But the start is pretty broad brushed. We can do a lot of things in the start area. Let's try this, let's try that. How about this, how about that? And get the employee going in the right direction. So keep, stop, start. Keep is our opportunity to give the employee praise. Thanks for doing this, keep on keeping on, we appreciate it. Stop doing this, not working for us, not working for you. Start doing this because it's a good idea. It's going to make things better. And then look at these 3, and you're probably already getting the sense when you look at these sort of action verbs here, communicate, clarify, and commit. The toughest one is obviously the commit. So communicate, tell them what you want them to do, listen to their explanations as to why they do certain things, listen to their potential, we hope, solutions to things, clarify what you want them to do specifically, get them to understand very specifically what changes you're going to ask them to make in terms of behavior or professional activities and duties, performance, right? And then the last one is the most challenging. Get their commitment to change. Here's the problem. One of the employees that we'll talk about in the archetype is what are called dolphins, meaning they're out of the water and then below. Then they're out of the water and below. When they're out of the water, they're doing what we want. They're working hard. When they're below the water, they stop. And the reason they stop is we stop putting pressure on them to perform. The commitment to change has to be all the time. If I talk to you about attendance and you come in for a week every day at 8:15, and then the following week you start coming in about 9:30, we have a problem, right? And so the biggest issue I see in the 15 that we're talking about is the commitment to change that lasts. And that's something you have to be very specific about. I don't want this to be a one and done, or you say, yes, I'm going to do this, and then you don't, employee, because I want your commitment, and use that phrase, to make these changes permanent. And the reason that they stop is they don't see any consequences for not continuing. And it's frustrating to deal with that because we have this up-down response instead of universal, yes, I'm going to do that for the time span that we've talked about until I quit or retire or leave. So let's talk about the PAM for a second, and I'll switch over to the 15. The PAM is a personal accountability meeting, and you say to yourself, okay, and I look at the phrase personal accountability and meeting, what is the key word there? And of course, it's accountability. I am asking you, employee, this is the last coaching meeting before we switch over to discipline. I'm asking you to take ownership. I'm asking you to step up and do these things, because if not, I will switch over to discipline in the next discussion. It doesn't always work. For some employees, they will go kicking and screaming into the discipline area. And that's why we have coaching files, because we can point to either HR or our bosses or plaintiffs' attorneys that we have done our level best in terms of giving them the opportunity to change performance or behavior, performance improvement plans, behavior improvement plans, etc. The last piece there is what I got from one of my colleagues who's a labor law attorney, Glenn Kramer in Los Angeles. And he says, is there any reason you can't make these changes? And then document what that employee says. What we're trying to do is pin down so there's no wiggle room as to their compliance for performance or behavior issues, that if you don't understand something, now is the time to talk about it. Now, we may have talked about it before, but this is the last coaching meeting before we switch over to discipline. I'm asking you to take ownership. If you do, then we won't need to move to discipline. If you don't, then we will. And you put the employee on notice, which is, I say, an ethical way to do things because it doesn't come out of left field. Let's look at the 15, the bully. The bully is somebody who uses physical intimidation or aggressiveness, or they have some sort of rank or status or titles in the organization, which makes them feel like they can mistreat people. This is a self-esteem issue, which they've done for a long time, and it worked for them. It worked for them in the schoolyard. It works for them at work. Sometimes there are bosses that do this. Sometimes there are employees who do it to other employees as a group, which is sad. And then other times it's employee to employee. And what I say in terms of confronting this is you have to have examples. Don't just say, don't be a bully, because first off, no one defines the phrase accurately. It is not defined well in the workplace as well as it is in the schoolyard, but it's not defined well at work. Focus on those examples and say, look, this is what has to stop. You are in jeopardy of moving to a harassing stage, and maybe we don't have bullying fully well defined in our HR policies, but it must stop. And with these examples, we give the employee as to why we don't want them to do certain things that a reasonable person would define as bullying. So harassment takes a lot of forms. It could be based on religious beliefs or gender or transgender or race or age. There's lots of things that can be based on harassment. We think about sexual harassment, which for my California colleagues, we know we have mandated training, AB 1825, every 2 years for supervisors, training and exposure to that subject for frontline employees and, not surprisingly, elected officials. I've done a zillion of those classes, and we talk about in California, there is a specific set of legal guidelines that said this training is required. Not all states have that, but it is important to at least expose employees to the concept of harassment prevention, not only at the onboarding or orientation stage when they first start working there, which is more than just here's our policy, you should know it, but actually talking about it. But then also occasional refreshers on this subject. And one of the biggest things for me is the concept of multiple channels of reporting, which says, employee, you have a duty to come forward and tell us when this is happening. It's involving a client, a customer, a vendor, a coworker, or a boss. We can't fix what we don't know about. And sometimes people that do this harassing behavior get away with it because people are afraid, they're embarrassed, and they don't know who to talk to. And so what we need to create in the coaching discussion is privacy and confidentiality, and the concept of being able to listen to people who are fearful of talking about the subject. They're embarrassed or anxious or angry, and that we enforce consequences. For the harasser, it's pretty simple. Stop doing these behaviors or you're fired. We enforce policy, we enforce consequences, we use examples of what is harassing behavior, and we don't fall for their excuses or rationalizations as to why they did it. If I look at this subject in 2025, it kind of matches what I have been done in my career in terms of the workplace violence work, which is you can't joke about shooting up the place. You can't joke about going postal, as we used to say in the old days. People would say that because this subject happens. And so in the year of 2025, no employee should have any misunderstanding that sexual or racial harassment is somehow allowed. Even if they worked at McDonald's as their only job before they came to us, they would have been exposed to the concept. And I say there is zero tolerance for this issue because it is not new. It has been going on since the dawn of work, and obviously since the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Smart slacker. This person is missing or retired on duty. They miss the old days. They're burnt out. They can't transfer. They can't promote. They want to retire, but they can't afford to. So what they do is they retire on duty and quit. And so the problem with the smart slacker is they really know how to do the work, but they don't want to. They really are skilled at their jobs, but they're no longer interested in doing them. And what they sometimes do is create other smart slackers by saying, what are you working so hard for? We all get paid the same. This employee can be difficult to coach because they're like, yeah, whatever, you know, what are you going to do? Fire me? And so that's where we use the PAM, the personal accountability meeting, after coaching has clearly not worked, to say, I expect you to step up. These are what I would call legacy employees, and remind them of being a legacy employee, meaning you've been here a long time. I know you know what to do and how to do it. Maybe they need a job change. Maybe they need new duties. Maybe they need some things taken away and other things added in. Maybe a change of scenery or a change of operations or a change of activity will help them out of this modality. But this is a tough one because they know how to do the work, but they don't want to. So the dolphin I talked about, the dolphin is out of the water, great performance, going well, back under the water, performance not so good. And so sometimes they're distracted. Sometimes they don't understand the consequences of this behavior. They only respond to pressure. And sometimes you have to say to them, I can't continue to remind you to do this work accurately. I can't continue to remind you to show up on time. I can't continue to remind you to be, to have quality work and meet your deadlines. The problem with the dolphin is when they sit with you in a meeting, they will agree, oh yes, you're absolutely right. And the reason they do that is to get out of the meeting. They don't want to continue talking with you about it and they're uncomfortable, so they'll agree. And at the end of the meeting, you go, God, I'm a genius. Look how well I got them to comply. And in reality, the only reason they said that was to get out of the meeting. So what you must do with the dolphin is enforce consequences by enforcing the commitment to change, and give them examples where you say, look, there are times when you are doing what we want you to do, and then times we aren't, and let's talk about why. Let's talk about motivation. Let's talk about how you see your job. Let's talk about how you see your career here. Otherwise, we get this up, down, in the water, under the water, above the water all year long. Well, this is a tough one and probably one of my least favorites. I would say probably the smart slacker is my least favorite to coach, but this is a tough one, passive aggressive. If you have a conversation with an employee, when you leave the room, you feel upset and you don't know why, that's passive aggressive. They're really, really good at guilt and sort of creating the kind of environment that somehow it's your fault for asking them to work harder. It's your fault for enforcing consequences. So they really can be quite manipulative, and they've learned this since childhood. I call them out with very specific examples. I want you to stop doing this and start doing this. I have high expectations for your performance. I don't want you to say that I'm picking on you, which is another classic of the passive aggressive. Sometimes they run to mom and dad, which is go to HR or a supervisor to say, you know, Steve's picking on me in this conversation because he told me I need to get to work on time and do my work. Sometimes the passive aggressives will convince senior leaders or HR people in the organization that they should be not have to go through coaching or not have to be singled out for performance or behavior, and so then they win. And so the issue there is we treat them like anybody else, which is demand high performance, demand compliance, demand that they do their work. And sometimes the passive aggressive process is I will do the bare minimum. When they call me out on it, I will accuse you of picking on me. And so you have to be ready for that, because that is one of their hallmark traits. The champion has a little passive aggressiveness in him or her. And the difficult part for the champion is they're not very good at their jobs oftentimes. And so what they do is they turn their eyes around the organization into being the whistleblower and defenders, and they point out stuff to bosses and HR, which is they believe is a hostile work environment. This is oftentimes been put into their head by one of their friends who's an amateur attorney or doesn't know anything about HR and thinks he or she does. The concept of the hostile work environment says it must involve protected class people. If you're not in a protected class, it's not a hostile work environment. So oftentimes what they point out is, I saw those people over there telling jokes. And I'm like, well, what about? I don't know, but they shouldn't be telling jokes at work. I'm like, you need to be given more to do. So oftentimes what happens with a champion is they are so good at blowing the whistle and stirring it up that this is a hostile work environment that it distracts their bosses and HR from the fact that they're not very good at their jobs. I see this in public government where someone has a very specific skill set, firefighter, cop, public works, water department, and they're not technically skilled at their jobs, so they stir the pot. And as a result, it's a distraction for what they should be focusing on, or we should be focusing on, which is changing their job to be better and improvement their work performance. So the question is, can you tell people to stop gossiping at work? And the answer is yes, because it impacts the business in a negative way. Again, this needs examples. And what I oftentimes use in the examples is, here's an example where I've heard or what's come to my attention, or I have seen you talk about these personal issues in people. And it's like a computer virus, employee. When you send this around the organization verbally or through emails and things like that, it's like a virus. It infects people, and it's not good for our organization. And what I've really seen in gossip at the nth degree is how it creates the silent treatment, and that's sort of the good end. And the bad end is people sabotage their personal and marital and friendships and relationships because they don't trust each other as a result of this. What happens with the gossip oftentimes is she or he will complain about being mistreated. People just give me the silent treatment, and I always say it's because they don't trust you. They don't trust you. They don't trust you to have a reasonable conversation amongst adults about something that somehow gets back to the people they didn't want it to get back to. So the question is, can you discipline people for gossip? And I would say, well, at least let's start with coaching, which is to stop saying or doing things that are not related to work, that hurt people's feelings, that a reasonable person would define as gossip. Stop doing it, get back to work. And oftentimes I go back to performance improvement plans, which is they need to be given more to do. So this is an interesting one. We think about psychopaths as sort of serial killers, and obviously that's a small percentage. I taught criminal profiling for years in San Diego, and when we talked about sociopaths, there are people who engage in criminal violence, but you can be a psychopath and not hurt people physically. You can be a psychopath and not murder people. You may have worked for these people as a boss. You may have worked around them as a colleague. And they have very interesting sort of a personality approach, which is they can be very smooth and charming, and also like a snake. They can backstab and hurt and lie and manipulate people for their own benefit. They don't feel bad about it. It doesn't bother them. They see themselves as superior, and they do this to get ahead in the organization. When I talk to my clinician pals in threat assessment work, where we talk about these people, they're impossible to treat. They try to manipulate the therapeutic process. So we need better boundaries with them. We need to tell them no more often for things. We need to enforce consequences when they harass people or bully people or railroad people or trample on people in meetings and things like that. And we need to think about whether or not they can continue to work in the organization if they don't change their approach, because people don't trust them, don't like them. There's a sense that being around them makes people uncomfortable. And so it's funny, if you put psychopath business books into Google or Amazon, a bunch of books will pop up from people who have written about this archetype as being somebody who is more common in organizations than we might first think. They can be bosses, they can be coworkers, they can be elected officials, they can be people that are in high status, sort of narcissistic positions, and they use that to physically, not physically, to emotionally or psychologically injure people. And so this approach is where they get ahead at the expense of other people. And sometimes folks get a vibe off of these people that fairly early on in their employee relationship that this sort of person exists. This vibe suggests that, I don't trust this person, don't want to be around them, don't enjoy engaging with them. And if that's the situation, it can be very difficult to manage this person in the organization or even to get them out of the organization. So I talk about the injustice collector, and they're an interesting person from the standpoint of fear. They have a sense of paranoia, which is built into sort of their understanding of how HR works and how coaching works and how discipline works in organizations. They may not be the best workers, but if they are confronted about this, they have a degree of paranoia, which is oftentimes amazingly accurate. Which is, if I'm not better in your perspective about how to do my job, you're going to try to fire me, and then we do, right? So they've sort of predicted their own demise. I see this a lot, which is their favorite phrase is, "It's not fair." Their favorite phrase is, "I'm being screwed." Their favorite phrase is, "This organization is not fair to me, and they don't want me to succeed." And so it can be really, really hard to get through to them because they have a degree of paranoia, which is sometimes they make people uncomfortable. They have what I would call a brittle personality. Brittle meaning they know one way to do their job, and they're not very likable, and they're not very joyous. They have almost zero sense of humor. I think what has to work with this person is that you prove them wrong with facts and the truth. And I use a phrase with them called test for truth. And oftentimes they will make sweeping generalizations about things. You people always, or I never, or you always, or you never. And I always go, well, tell me an example where that happened. And then we try to collapse that example because it's not always true. When we look at the injustice collector, sometimes their perception of being mistreated may be based on something that happened 10 years ago. And so you have to say, look, this is a new, I wasn't your boss back then. Let's talk about how you are going to do these things that we've talked about. And I'm trying to be supportive. I'm not out to hurt you or harm you. And sometimes they need reassurance and to be reminded that it's not always about harming them or their perception of the longevity of their career. So this is an interesting one from the standpoint of impact. I know lots of narcissists. We see them on movie screens, and we see them as politicians. We see them in sports. We see this behavior as, dig me, look how swell and important I am. But oftentimes it's, especially if we go back to a sort of a business and personal sense, it's because they're insecure and they have low self-esteem. So they double down on the narcissism to feel better about themselves and to feel more worthy. I think what happens with a narcissist is if we give them too much praise, it inflates their ego. But if they don't get any praise at all, they sort of double down on the narcissism. Aren't I important? Look at all the cool things that I do. And I think we use praise in a measured way. Say, hey, Roy, appreciate what you're doing. Thanks for your contribution to this thing. But we keep things in a useful perspective. So the narcissist can be defined sort of clinically in two ways. One is they wound people, and then the other one is they're just sort of ego-driven. The times I see mostly in organizations, it's the second, which is they're mostly ego-driven. So they have to be number one on the sales list. They have to be, first in the meeting to say things, and they tend to dominate other people, and they can be kind of an idea killer too in meetings, especially if it did not involve them in the conversation. They feel left out of things, and so they'll try to dominate the discussion to feel put back into things. So the statue is an interesting person because they have sort of a stoic nature, and you may have talked to this person and said, what, they just sit there. So I say, can we talk about your quality of your work? Can we talk about meeting deadlines? Can we talk about how you interact with our clients and customers? And they won't engage. Maybe they agree, maybe they don't, but you don't know. And so sometimes it could be language barrier. English is not their first language. Sometimes it could be they're just highly introverted and they just don't say anything. And then the other one is sometimes they have been embarrassed in front of their boss or peers in meetings, and they got criticized in meetings and they never forgot it. So they said, the reason or the way that I won't be criticized by somebody else is I just won't engage. I won't speak. And I guess the problem, and the other one, if you look down at the bottom there, idea killers shoot down their ideas and they won't say anything as a result. And I think you have to go to the idea killers off to the side and say, look, I appreciate you have enthusiasm, and I appreciate that you want to talk about what won't work around here. I'd like you to hold that off until we get some perspective of what will work around here from people that the other folks in the organization, besides just your perspective. I think they're short of praise, the statues. If you say stuff like, man, that's a great idea, I really appreciate you contributing to that, maybe it builds some momentum with them. But oftentimes what I see here is they were embarrassed or criticized, and so they say, I'm just not going to engage. And it can be challenging for bosses when you talk about performance evaluation or coaching conversations where they just give you one-word answers. And I guess the other part for this would be to ask more open-ended questions. When we say stuff like, are you enjoying your job? They're like, yes. Say, what do you like about your job? I always ask the same 6 questions. Oftentimes I come into an organization, I don't know anything about the employees other than what the HR or the bosses have told me. And oftentimes their perspective is skewed because they're angry about some performance or behavior issue, and that's why I'm in the building. But if I have a chance to talk, and including this employee, I would say the same 6 questions. Tell me what you like about your job. I don't know, I guess this, and this. All right, well, tell me what you don't like about your job. And they say, well, I don't like this, and this. All right. The third question would be, tell me what your coworkers, your colleagues do that makes your job easier. And then obviously the fourth question is, tell me what your coworkers, your colleagues do that make your job more difficult. And then the fifth question and sixth question, if you're not the boss, their direct boss, you could say, tell me what your boss does that makes your job easier, that you like, that you're glad he or she does. The sixth question, obviously, one is, tell me what your boss does that makes your job harder and you wish he or she would not do those things. So if I had 6 people or 5 people in one after another, and I spent 20 minutes or 15 minutes just asking those 6 questions to everybody, in the end of that, hour and a half interviews of these 5 or 6 people, would I have a pretty good feel for the culture of the organization? Yeah. Would I have a pretty good feel for what works and is not working in the organization? Yes. Would I have a pretty good feel about how people perceive their bosses and their coworkers? Yeah. I like those 6 questions because it draws, at least in a perfect world, it draws these types of employees out instead of asking them yes, no questions, because yes, no questions don't give us very much data. This is a difficult one. So we talk about the hygiene challenged employees. Look down at the bottom there. We talk about this as a care fronting exercise. My clinician colleague called this caring enough to confront the issue. Care fronting is, I'm going to have a hard conversation with an employee about hygiene. And so there's a lot of interesting reasons, and I've done a number of these, and they're challenging coaching conversations. And they impact the business in a negative way. That's why we have them. It's not just, it's irritating, or it's not just it's a bother. It bugs people. It bothers our clients. It bothers our coworkers. We address it because it impacts the business in a negative way. And the reasons for it are sometimes unique to me, which is it's health related. They're having some medication issues, or they're depressed. It's some religious accommodation. They're lazy or distracted. But the one that always gets me, and the one that I see most often, is they're angry at the organization. They're angry at their coworkers. So they do this, don't take showers, don't change their clothes, as revenge, which is interesting, right? They do this because they feel angry at certain people or a group. Maybe they have been bullied. And you have to dig deeper to find out if I need to make accommodations for you HR-wise, we can talk about it. But tell me why, this is happening, because is there something I can do for you in terms of referral to employee assistance program or our medical benefits? Because I want to make sure that we're not missing something here, that you're being harassed or bothered or threatened by somebody, that you're doing this as a kind of a response. Now, again, not an easy conversation to have for sure, but definitely necessary, because this is a big wedge sometimes that drives employees, to pick on this other person or to ignore them. And it's not what we need in terms of team concept. You may have seen this person in meetings, the challenger know-it-all. And one of the things that they do is confront you as a boss in front of other people to really kind of show how smart they are. They confront you or criticize your ideas to show everybody that they're not afraid of you as a boss. Now, we don't want people afraid of bosses, but the point being, sometimes they have a disrespectful response to you, and they'll say things about how dumb your idea was in front of the people that work for you. And I think sometimes you have to take them aside and say, I'd like you to stop that behavior. I'd like you to contribute positively. And if you can't contribute positively, I don't want you to say anything. Sometimes we can use peer pressure. You can see down at the bottom. Sometimes I just look at people who say goofy stuff or sort of provocative things, or things that are designed for sort of a provocative answer, and I just don't say anything. I just look at them, and I'll stare at them until someone in the room says, hey, Larry, let Steve, run the meeting here. And sometimes peer pressure works. But they do this because they're frustrated with you. They're frustrated about not moving ahead in the organization. They don't feel respected by you or other people. And I think this is a challenging coaching conversation, because you got to figure out what the root is. Is there something I've done as your boss? Is there something that you feel you're not being heard? Are you not being rewarded or praised for your good ideas? Because what I see is you have this idea killing kind of a perspective, and everything I say in meetings, you tend to want to criticize, and I want to know why. And I want it to stop. This is kind of an offshoot of the idea killer, an offshoot of the challenger, which is smarty comments, jokes that are often hurtful. They have a snappy comeback to everything. Oftentimes you see this in meetings. Sometimes you see it in coaching discussions, but oftentimes more often in group meetings. It's a self-esteem issue. It's attention seeking. They feel bad about themselves, so they pick on other people. They have these sort of snappy comments and these little jokes about stuff, which is oftentimes sarcastic. Sometimes they will do it, that's right on the edge or crosses the line in terms of harassing behavior. And I call them out on it, especially in meetings. I may call them out on it and just say, can you talk? Let's talk afterwards. And what that means to the rest of the group members is I'm going to address it with this person. I'm not asking you to be a frozen block of ice, but I want you to consider that there's a volume knob in your comments, and sometimes the stuff you say is disruptive, and sometimes the jokes are not funny to other people, and sometimes you're right on the edge of being harassing. I want to stop. And so what happens oftentimes, if you look at the challenger or the jokester or the champion, is that they will respond with the famous and never useful process of the silent treatment. Fine, I just won't talk then, right? I just won't speak in meetings. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't always last, but you can see them sometimes sitting there seething because they feel like that you wounded them in asking them to change their behavior. Now, sometimes this runs its course, but sometimes you can pull them aside and say, look, I want you to participate, but I want you to participate positively. The jokes, the sarcasm, the interruptions, these things are not useful in how we do our meetings, and it bothers other people. And in fact, so much so that they have talked to me about it, and it bothers me, and I'd like you to change. Excuse me. You may have worked around the plow horse. You may have worked as a boss of a plow horse. What happens with a plow horse is they're nice people, but they pull the plow until they run into a rock in the middle of the field, and they just sit on the plow. What has happened in their past is a boss has literally told them, don't think outside the box. Don't waste our time and money. Don't be creative. Just come up with the answer I need. And so if they couldn't come up with the answer, they just shelved the project. When these people retire, we find a big collection of 25 file folders full of half-done things. What happens is if they run into the smallest obstacle, they do not think outside the box in terms of, well, maybe I should call back, or maybe I should look online, or maybe I should talk to somebody else to get the answer. They just put it away. The solution to this in the coaching conversation is praise. The solution to this in coaching discussions is encourage them to be creative and to option think and to problem solve. And when they do it, praise them. What they were told a long time ago is don't be very smart, just keep your head down and do your thing, and that's what they do. And so they're not a behavioral issue, but it's a performance issue. It's an action issue, meaning we need to give them more examples of success when they have been creative enough. When you look at the last person I'm going to talk about, they have the opposite effect here. And this is the shining star, or what I would call the rising star. The shining star, rising star. Rising star means that they want to promote. Shining star is somebody who is really good at their job, and they may or may not want to promote, but we have a tendency to want to put them in charge when we're out of town, or give them delegated tasks or responsibilities that other people don't get. So a couple downsides to the rising star, the shining star. One is it's teacher's pet. Other employees see this person getting opportunities they don't get. They get to go to training classes, they get to be in charge, they get to work on fun projects. And then the other one is we can burn them out. We can load them with too much stuff, give them too many responsibilities, too many delegated tasks. So you have to be careful of that. But the rising star is the person we think about for promotions and career development. The rising star is the person we help coach in terms of the mentorship process to get them to higher positions, including succession planning. And then the shining star is a person that just has a work ethic and a kindness towards others and a positive personality. And then it creates really what I would call the coaching paradox. We want to spend time around these people. We want to talk with these people. We enjoy meetings with these people. We enjoy discussions about career and their professional development. We enjoy conversations with them. And as a result, we sometimes ignore or minimize or don't give enough attention to those employees who drive us crazy. The coaching paradox says you will have to spend more time with people who need your help. You will have to spend more time with employees who are challenging to you, that you don't want to. You don't want to spend time with the employee who drives you crazy. They drive you crazy, which means I don't want to engage with them. I just want to let it go. And what happens there is the behavior worsens, or the message to the organization is you can get away with stuff here that's distracting and irritating and bothersome and hurts the business because our bosses don't care. So I'm not saying you have to micromanage people, but the coaching paradox says you have to spend more time with employees who need coaching. I mean, if you look at professional sports, all professional sports have coaches in very specific areas. There's a coach for the guy that kicks field goals. But we spend a lot of time with those employees that need the support, just like they spend a lot of time in sports with that player who needs to be better at his or her job. So last couple things here, and I'm happy to take any questions. I'll turn it back over to Michelle. And obviously you have the access to these slides, and I hope they could be useful to you. I see sometimes people use the slides as kind of with internal coaching with each other, when you say, let's work on some of these typologies. Let's work on some of these specific 3 or 4 that I recognize in our organization as a collection of bosses. Let's talk about what our approach is. Let me share some of these with HR because I recognize some of these employees in my own group, and what do I do about it? HR should be giving you coaching support. You should be also getting coaching support from your bosses, not waiting for bad things to happen and then HR or your boss says, why didn't you fix this? We are paying attention to things, not in a micromanaging way, but in a observational way as to what hurts the business. We address it with coaching. So last piece here is what I would call the coaching dynamic. When we talk to employees, this 15 in specifically, we're in a teaching or tutorial role. As they start to get it, as they start to change performance or behavior, make improvements based on homework and continuous conversations about it and asking them to commit to change, we start to play more of an advisory role, which is they're starting to get it. And at the end of this stage, in a perfect world, we have assisted discovery where they figured it out on their own and the changes stick and the changes last. So this may be one meeting that we move through all 3 of these roles in one hour-long conversation. But more specifically, this is typically over a span of time, especially with those employees who have fairly significant issues. One meeting at a time, one conversation at a time, not 15 sins in one meeting, but one thing that impacts the business in a negative way that is either performance or behavior based that we want to address. Keep on keeping on until we move through this process. Some employees never get to assisted discovery, some do it pretty quickly, but you can always be in a tutorial or an advisory role to them to say that how far I want to take you for this coaching discussion is dependent on you, but I'm going to give you all the tools, the help, support, homework, praise that I can to get you there. Michelle, back over to you for any questions that we have.
Okay, we have had quite a few just comments about what a great presentation this was, but no particular questions have come up. So with that, I'm going to thank everybody for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation on our website. Thank you, Dr. Albrecht, for your time and expertise today. We hope all the attendees found today's webinar to be a valuable use of your time. Be sure to join us on October 7th for our Coaching Skills for Supervisors, Getting Employee Performance and Behavior Improvement, One Meeting at a Time webinar. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Michelle.